The key point being like, let's be clear about what a strategy is, and then like, let's be clear about what we believe are the right capabilities in order to fulfill that strategy successfully.
ProCognita, Get Agile podcast.
How should strategy shape organizational design? Interview with Rowan Bunning. So, hi and welcome to Get Agile podcast. Today we are in Singapore for the LESS conference, Singapore, and today is Rowan Bunning, who, did I say your name right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Who opened the conference today with a keynote, and so let me start with the first question. Who is Rowan? I know the answer, but still, not all the people know the answer.
Yeah, sure, Thomas. It's great to see you in Singapore, a lot closer to where I live in Sydney. So yeah, I've been, I guess, into Scrum training and coaching since becoming, I guess, Australia's first Scrum Master, you might say, in 2003. Prior to that, lots of technical hands-on development. And yeah, really lucky to be, I guess, a real key trainer and quite prominent, I guess, in the Australian Agile scene. I did work in the UK for a little bit, and that's where I kind of saw Agile at scale for the first time, and just had some really good experiences with less like ways of working as well. So that was way back in 2008, very start of 2008, when I first saw these sorts of things. And yeah, I guess these days have done a lot of training, really trying to transition it more into the management consulting and helping managers, leaders think about the bigger picture around the organisation. Because I do see like that being the ceiling for a lot of what we've done over the years. Often the people on the training or the people in the teams just don't have the authority to really make the changes necessary to make it thrive or even make it sustainable. So yeah, that's what's interesting me. And yeah, I think the community here is fantastic. All of the LESS conferences have been, really good, but I think just lots of very thoughtful conversations from obviously people who are kind of thinking beyond the constraints of a lot of organisations they've been dealing with. The feedback I got from after the session this morning was just very kind of candid and direct, and a lot of thank yous and things. So I really enjoyed that.
By the way, information to all of you watching us, most likely the video with Rowan speaking at the stage of LESS conference Singapore is already online, because they will probably do this faster than I mean publishing. And we also need to mention that you're LESS friendly Scrum trainer, so you're promoting LESS in Australia.
I am, yes. Yeah, I tend to try to do occasional talks that are LESS related, and New Zealand as well. I guess I've done quite a lot of training in New Zealand and talked about it at various little breakfast events and things over there. But we do run certified LESS basics courses occasionally. And again, you get some quite thoughtful people who are trying to understand things outside of perhaps the SAFe and Spotify kind of models and things. I find that that's often, sadly, LESS gets lumped in with those things. It's just like at the end of the scaling frameworks kind of list of SAFe and Spotify, and by the way, there's LESS, and a lot of people don't really understand how different they are and really have much clue about LESS, I think, beyond the very, very superficial, unfortunately.
All right, so talking about the LESS, so this is different from the way it approach, let's call it scaling, and it's focused on how do you design the organization. So let's have a look at how we design the organization. What are the principles here?
Yeah, so first of all, I like to start by trying to find some degree of alignment around what people with authority to make some serious change believe the organisation needs. And, I guess the go-to kind of way of looking at that for LESS, and I think a lot of sensible org design, is to think of the organisation as a system, and you can choose how you design that system towards certain sorts of capabilities, or what people call optimising goals. So that's something I got quite interested in several years ago. And the way I think of it is, we shouldn't sort of start the conversation with the solution, right? It's often very backwards to sort of say, look at that company over there. And this is what we get a lot, I think. In the United States, we heard there's a fair bit of that just in the culture, and also in Australia, the social proof type of thinking.
The other people are doing this one, so we can just copy paste. That's how we get into the Spotify model, which basically wasn't used in Spotify, but everybody was. I think there are still companies who tried the Spotify model those days.
There's been a lot of that in Australia.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it feels like things have moved a bit beyond that now in terms of that being just like, copy paste thinking, but for several years there it was literally safe in the Spotify model, and pretty much no one really could imagine anything else being seriously entertained.
So if not copy paste, then the alternative is?
To sort of go back to first principles.
Yeah.
And I think, and I even have a slide I've used in a couple of presentations, not today's one, but basically says, well, what was the dominant kind of way that your organization came to your way of working? And there's options like the consultants came in and told us what to do, basically. It was the most senior leader, had experienced something before and they were comfortable with a certain thing they'd seen before.
Which by the way, we need to mention that is most comfortable, right? Because you copy, but it also has kind of mandate that it works somewhere else, so you feel more safe in this case, right? So you don't have to think because there's someone else who did all the thinking for you, so you just go and implement this one.
Yeah, okay, so that's a really good observation, I think, for us all to just be aware of. That, that's two things there, I think, isn't there? That there's one is that there's a certain personal kind of needs, that there's risk involved in change, right? And if someone can sort of say with some degree of credibility that, hey, it's worked this other place, and if it doesn't work here, well, it's not because it can't work, right? They've got some proof, isn't it? And again, that social proof thing just seems to be so prevalent when people have some concept that, hey, this other organization is desirable, like Spotify is a cool kind of organization, they've been successful, etc. Why can't we list that?
Let's copy this one into our bank because we're going to be fun as well, right?
Yeah, there's that angle, and I guess there's...
So let's look at the alternative. So we know where it comes from, but if we don't give people alternative, then they're gonna do this anyway.
Well, I mean, thinking about first principles, in a business you have a business model, you have an actual strategy, and a lot of it is not just having this wonderful concept of a strategy, be able to execute on that strategy. And to do that you need certain capabilities, and some organisations to execute on something that's a little different to what they've achieved before might require some capabilities they don't currently have. And one of the things I've been sort of seeing more and more with strategy talk these days in the last several years is that your strategy isn't a static thing that just gets set for 10 years and you just execute.
Not any longer. I mean, you could probably try this if you didn't have a competitions, 20 years ago, but right now with the market more, not any longer. Right?
And the pace of that sort of reason for change from external forces and perhaps your internal ambition is speeding up, isn't it? So what we really need is as a way to be able to have the organisational model and the way the organisation operates keep in sync with that evolving strategy. And sometimes there might be big shifts, sometimes there might be more modest shifts, but even having the capacity to change without too much turbulence, or to be able to change in a way that's not just a superficial relabeling, but actually the deeper sort of change that's meaningful to the results you'll get for a strategy, right? So the key point being, let's be clear about what a strategy is, and then let's be clear about what we believe are the right capabilities in order to fulfill that strategy successfully.
So what you're saying, if the company has no idea what is the strategy, then there is no idea. I mean, the conversation about the capabilities doesn't make sense. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, it can expose that as just we're not clear enough, really, to make some good choices.
A friend of mine told me a good test for checking if the strategy makes any sense. Like, if you say something completely opposite, does it still make sense?
Yeah, the opposite test. Yeah.
We how do you say it?
It's called the opposite test.
Opposite test. Like, we want to be fast, and there is no one who will tell you we want to be slow, right? That's not going to happen, right?
Yeah, it's like, of course, everyone would want that, basically. In which case, it's not really a strategy. It's just like a...
I want to be young and healthy and rich and but it's not a strategy, right? So one of the things is like a lot of strategies, like it looks great on the poster, but doesn't tell you what you don't do, right? And what I'm hearing from you, if you don't know the strategy, then you don't know. Well, as the cat from the Alice said, if you don't know where you're going, that every path is a good path, I believe.
Yeah. So maybe just on that, I've just been doing this executive MBA module on strategy in Europe. It was in France at INSEAD and other places, and one of the most popular authors in that space that a lot of our lecturers were into is Rummold. His name is Rummold. And he came up with that opposite test, I believe it was him. And one of the cool things you can do now with AI is basically say, as Rummold, like take on that persona and think that way. Here's my strategy such that it is now, basically critique it, rip it apart, tell me where it doesn't actually, hold, water, or it could be, a more effective strategy, basically. And you'll tend to find it very quickly. AI can tell you this almost instantly, whether that strategy is actually, something reasonable or pretty flimsy.
So it seems that a lot of companies just lost their business to AI again.
Well, there's more to it obviously than that, but at least you can test whether or not you've got something worth holding water with.
So if we have if we have a strategy, then what you're saying, you can talk about the capabilities. And how do you do that?
Yeah, so the way I like to do it is like two steps really. But one is to, first of all, surface some awareness across the group of people, and this is normally pretty senior leaders, ideally executives, who, just maybe there's some other perspectives that they're not as close to right now that could understand the current situation with their organisation. And one thing we want to avoid is this backward-looking, let's just fix the current pain points or the current problems. Strategy should be forward-looking and aspirational.
Design the organisation you want to have half a year from now, not today, right?
Yeah, more than half a year even, But so one thing is to try to avoid just backward-looking thinking about what the pain points have been in the past and just try to focus on addressing them. A good strategy is thinking about the future, and it's aspirational and could be looking some years out into the future. Because the classic thing we get with a lot of not so great attempts at Agile change have been just to say, waterfall's too slow, it's not delivering quickly enough, let's just fix the speed problem, right? And that might take you down the path towards perhaps some good flow or some shorter lead times and things, but it doesn't necessarily look at agility or customer value. You could be delivering lots of low value things very quickly, but that's maybe not the real problem that you're aspiring to, right? So reframing it as the aspiration. But also, maybe doing some things to look at, like, what's the nature of the domains we're working in. So, like a lot of people in the community, I like Cynefin, so sort of start to get people to do some sense making around what we're dealing with, and perhaps bring in some other perspectives, from people perhaps that are a bit closer to some of that detail, and perhaps do things like some sort of value stream mapping, or just sort of some real data on the performance of different things that they might be interested in. So that's the more just awareness raising.
Okay. Yep. So before we move forward, who are you involved in this kind of workshops?
Yeah, so it depends at what level the mandate is for some sort of change in the near term. In plenty of clients that are not massive organisations, I guess, like medium-sized, or where there is an executive who's kind of engaging me, will do it at least their level. It could be the top executive team ideally. If not, then at least like in one value creating segment of the organisation, and maybe there is like a couple of departments. If there's product and engineering or something, you'd want some representation across at least those. And it's a good, maybe a half dozen people or something like that is pretty typical in a lot of those
Yeah,
workshops.
one thing I just wanted to for people to hear, like you don't just do this with executives because often they have no insight, let's call it this way, how the stuff are happening at the team levels. And one of the things they discovered during the value stream mapping, this is my observation, is like it always takes more time than they think that it's gonna take, right? So.
Yeah. So that's exactly why to do that step one, and bring in some perhaps key people with insights. And sometimes you recognise who those people are from doing that step one and doing those sort of value stream mappings and saying these two people know a lot about what's really going on, right? Yeah, and I've done exercises like that where we've taken one whiteboard and mapped out what went on, and then people said, oh, actually, it was called something different. There was a previous initiative that went for another 12 months before that, and then there's actually 6 months of discovery before that even. So now you've got 3 whiteboards, and people are going, oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah, so recently we have a conversation, and they say that they started collecting requirements like 2013 or something like that. Yeah. And initiative is still in progress, So yeah. Wow. So this is what you discovered. Like the delivery took 3 months, but the initial phase took 2 years or something like that, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess the idea is to have some perspectives on the current state and recent past. Look primarily at the sort of true north of the strategy as you come into a workshop where basically it's like a matchmaking exercise where everyone as leaders has got a set of cards which are all exactly the same, and a bit like planning poker, we're kind of saying to them, all right, out of all these maybe 20 even options as to what we could be actually having as capabilities towards being successful with that strategy, what would be your top choice?
So can you give a few examples of what is on the card?
So there's things like throughput or flow. There's like classic old school things like resource utilization, basically. But there's things like value creation, adaptability. So I sometimes try to use words that are, not too biasing. That's a lot of the challenge, actually, to get away from just saying agility or agile, because that can obviously bias people into a certain perception of what that is, right?
Yeah, I heard this sentence way back. Is like everybody has their own opinion about agile, so stop using the word agile, right?
Yes, and then that's why it's not just a one-word card. It's actually got a full sentence description of what that means. Okay. And one thing we'll tend to do is just invite people to ask clarifying questions about, do you understand what that really means? Give some examples sometimes comes up. But yeah, trying to not have any anchoring or biasing towards any particular, expectation of what the response is. And yeah, inviting all, let's say it's half a dozen people to place a card on the table without anyone saying their answer for starters. And then when everyone's got some sort of view, we'll flip them and compare the responses. And yeah, it's really interesting. In some organizations, it's almost unanimous, if the top ones are straight off the bat. And it may be because there's been quite a lot of discussion and certain language used around what they're looking for. In other organizations, it is normally not massively variant, but there's maybe 2 or 3 different, things that people are more keen on. And then, tend to also play a second and a third, no more than 3 typically, and start to look at people to make the case, I guess, a bit like, again, planning poker, do we do another round and see, can you convince other people that this is actually worth promoting over that other one?
But is it, so here's my thinking happening right now, so I'm thinking loud and it could go any wrong direction, but is it because they haven't talked about this, or is it because each of this group, let's say, they have a different optimization goal?
Yeah, it definitely be the latter, right? So for example, some cards have things like working in highest priority order and then the maximizing customer value. Yeah. If you talk to someone who's like indirect to the ultimate customer.
Yeah, mid-level management can have a different goal, right?
Yeah, or if you've got a IT department that's more a service provider to customer-facing groups beyond that, basically, then they'll typically not choose the maximizing customer value because
Yeah.
they don't really kind of deal with that day to day. They're more,
yeah.
we deal with the internal stakeholders that actually know about that customer value. And that's where some of the interesting conversation can come out to say, you know, what's the sort of scope of what we're looking at here? Is it just the IT group? Probably not, right? It's actually including these other units that are required to create the ultimate customer value externally. And, you know, what would we think of as the primary thing overall for that overarching providing customer value externally type of situation? So sometimes that, yeah, can elevate it out of just that sort of subset, I guess, of people's thinking. But, yeah, end of the day, I guess one of the big things is, can we come to a agreement, at least a initial agreement on what we're going to study more deeply? And then after the workshop, you know, normally having some follow-ups around, you know, a lot of the sort of ambiguities of questions that come up for people. You know, what does this mean in practice? You know, if we were to optimize for, you know, that throughput rather than that, you know, value creation adaptability, for example, you know, what does that really look like? And then coming back and ratifying things based on perhaps some further thought that's not just in the heat of the moment in the one workshop.
What do you mean by redefine things?
To redefine things,
Yeah,
or
because you
clarify
said
things.
the clarifying.
Yeah, I think this is where a bit of expertise as a facilitator comes in too, because you know, one thing you've got to be a little bit careful of is not providing examples or solutions, I guess, that might be really biasing. You know, if we started saying, oh well, throughput means this particular framework, we're using like something that's not exactly what you might have expected as your solution, they can start to have the solution drive the thinking rather than the actual problem.
Yeah, so my experience, again, is like something we mentioned before, is like people want examples, and examples are practical, but all examples are also anchoring people to this specific example. I have some of my tools, but want to ask you about your tools because this is an interview with you, not with me. So my observation is like people will start asking about the specific examples. What you do then?
Yeah, the ideal for me is to start to have that as a conversation where it's not just here's the one answer, but you know, here's some ways we can think about the strengths and weaknesses of different choices. Like if we're trying to optimize for working in highest value order, you know, we will need to think about how we can avoid having too many constraints around the scope of the not just the cross functionality, the skills that teams can have, but also the scope of their work mandate to be able to work across different parts of the problem space. And that's a little bit beyond, you know, perhaps some of the just work on these components or work on this one step in the business process type of situations. There's like a couple of different dimensions of expansion of the capabilities going on there. So when you start to talk through things like that, you know, you can avoid just saying, I'll go to feature teams, go to less, basically. You're starting to sort of have a bit of more of a thoughtful, you know, conversation that people start to understand the reasoning for that line of thinking, basically. And yeah, I mean, I'm very happy if we can defer any mention of a Scrum or a less or a Kanban or whatever till as late as possible in it, and people are much more thinking about, oh yeah, there's some real principles here, and I can see why there'd be a much stronger kind of case for that particular direction in terms of structures and processes and various things than just go to the flavor of the month framework. Yeah.
All right. So if let's say they agree on a specific optimization goal and they have this conversation, what does it mean? So they think they have an understanding of what it means for them. I'm saying think because, you know, it's always will be different, and they will discover this soon, my assumption. What do you do next?
So, yeah, typically workshops that take us through that sort of thinking about what does that mean for the different elements of the org design. So the classic Galbraith star model is just a nice place to start with that. And again, I think for some people they've already made assumptions that, oh, this change will just be a process only change. And again, it sort of really baffles me that people still think that.
You do this at the bottom of the organization, right? This is what people
Yeah.
assume often.
Well, not even that. I think that there's, plenty of leaders that have been sort of sold the message that it's just ceremonies, it's just some sort of different process.
So what by the bottom is like this is how you manage team, basically. This is often the message I'm seeing.
Yeah, okay. And that's, again, one of the other big mental traps I think a lot of people by default sort of fall into, partly because of the original framing. It's just a team level thing, right?
Yeah.
And they start to think about the boxes, right? There's always these mental boxes going on in people's heads, probably reflected in the org chart in a lot of cases. But they could also be thinking of it just as a delivery thing, and discovery is a separate thing, or just a project thing, so it's all in that sort of existing structure. And the assumption as soon as that happens is that everything outside the box of the delivery piece of a project, let's say, at team level, stays the same, absolutely the same. Don't even think about questioning that or changing that or kind of rethinking that, right? And again, that's completely missing the need for alignment to have some, even just the process be changed for teams. There may well be the need for structural change. You need a cross-functional set of people, et cetera, yeah.
Yeah, so how do you handle this one? Because, the problem with assumption is that we don't see them. With this, all the boxes you just mentioned, you don't see them, and often you discover them way later than you should. So how you address those?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think the way this whole conversation starts out is a framing around the business strategy and at some sort of scope that is clearly beyond just a single team, clearly beyond a single project, and also more a conversation that's about the medium to long term, and it's not just a temporary thing, it's not just for one initiative kind of framing. The other thing I think as a facilitator for all of us really to listen to the language people use, right? And when I think a really powerful way to do things is to not just try to offer your examples, but sort of say, well, what's an example you think might be, a good one for this? And if people start saying, for that new initiative, which is, greenfields or building something, okay, but this applies to those guys kind of thing. And then you already know that they're put in a box that's probably quite narrow, basically. So, I'm really conscious of that sort of box language, I guess, and I think even better if you can get to a whiteboard and draw, this, because, sometimes you can sort of be in the facilitator's mind, or the way I was trying to frame it was like some big thing around an overall quite large part of the entire organisation's business, right? It fits into the business model over here kind of thing. And you've got your strategy for the next 3 years or something around that. And then when they draw their pieces, like some other little box inside of that or separate to that. Yeah. So, and that's, maybe one thing just to touch on. I think I've come to a lot more appreciation of visualizing things as part of this as well, partly through the work of Alexei and Rowan with the org topologies.
Which are also here, by the way. Yeah. So we say hi to, Alex is here, Rowan is not here. So we say hi to Alex and Rowan.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, you can find the previous podcast with the conversation with Alex on the recording from the previous podcast as well here. Sorry.
Yeah, but I think just in all of this, that one of the key challenges for all of us is just to have people think that it's worth kind of continuing quite a bit of conversation pretty actively. One trap I have seen is people going, we had the workshop, now just tell us the answer, right?
Yeah. I'm just gonna slow us down because we say hi to Alex, but we didn't mention, you mentioned their work, but we didn't mention what is that. So
sure.
So
Alexei and Roland have come up with org topologies, which at its simplest is really a way to visualize where your current organization's up to and look at where you want to go. It's a mapping technique, and plus some other things to help with change. But I think it's really powerful just to be able to see things like in a concrete visual form that really captures the extent and the limitations of your team's capabilities. And they do that in terms of the skills, it's called skills mandate, and in terms of the work domain, what sort of problem space the team can take on toward the full, customer problem. And yeah, you see some very interesting things. Like a lot of people think they've done a great job when they've shifted out of what's called a resource topology, where you've had, very narrow specialist focus just on tasks that, people are just expected to do what is given to them as tasks. And then you have managers who need to do a lot of the work to kind of figure out how they farm out those tasks and coordinate activity. And they've shifted it to a delivery topology where it's actually a cross-functional team. And I think for a lot of people in the Agile space, that's as far as they sort of imagine things going. Like a fully end-to-end cross-functional team sounds brilliant. But the org topologies even has not just one, but even two extents on the horizontal beyond end-to-end team, fully end-to-end team. And that includes where there's a mandate to deliberately learn more skills, to keep on extending beyond that, and even to quite speculatively, experiment with things that may or may not be relevant for the future, way out into, maybe some quite experimental machine learning or something that could be, not on the backlog today, but it could be actually really useful for the future. And similar for the work domain extent, that one is where, lots of people are thinking, again, that's someone else's job to kind of do the discovery or to talk to customers or to sort of understand the problem space. But moving that direction has, I think really been the original idea with a lot of the Agile kind of thinking way back from the extreme programming days, things like user stories, where we're actually meant to encourage you talking to actual users. There's
the crazy idea of developers talking to users.
Yeah, it baffles me. I run just a very simple thing on training where we say, all right, you've got technical people who understand the technology and that sort of solution space, but they don't understand the business domain very well. Then you've got this business person or people that understand business space but not technology space. And what do you do about this communication gap? And for a lot of people,
Write Jira tickets, sorry.
Yeah, that's that. And
ladies and gentlemen, that was a joke. Don't do this.
Yeah, but literally that's what it ends up being, because they basically say, well, it's someone else's job to go and talk to those other people, and basically there's this always just trying to compensate for the two different understandings of the two different worlds. Rather than think about what if we could actually increase learning about another part of the world, right? So that you could actually have overlap of understanding and the same terminology being used by those people to communicate directly much more.
Crazy idea.
Yeah.
All right, we mentioned a number of tools for the org design. Anything that you think is worth mentioning before we slowly conclude the conversation?
Just I think generally there's some really rich kind of resources in probably 3 communities that are all fairly related now. And I think a lot of that work started with Craig Larman and Bas Vode's and original 2 books even and the LESS community. But we've had Cesario Ramos and Ilya wrote this, I think, really great book, The Creating Agile Organizations. That the first part of that is really a lot of the thinking, really the thinking tools. It's really making the case for a different approach, a more systemic approach. And then the rest of it's like the coaching, how do you kind of work that through an organization? There's plenty of sort of deeper pieces to it that, maybe they left out of the book because of, space constraints. And some of that's been addressed with the Designing Agile Organizations course. And I brought out someone to teach that in Australia, just to try to get a bit of that going. And then also we've got the org topologies now as well, which to me that's probably the simplest and easiest sort of starting point to getting the conversations going, getting people thinking and really appreciating the current goodness and also the current limitations of your current setup. And I think that's a great way to be able to break out of what has just happened in a lot of Agile adoptions, I think, where people have gone quite hard, but maybe not fully at the cross-functionality of teams, but they've still got them siloed into components, still got them siloed into steps in the business process, still got them very separated from the customer. And to compensate with that, they need PI plannings, or they need, some sort of structure with technical program managers. And there's a lot of patterns that unfortunately have just been repeated and repeated as if that's the only way.
A comment to our audience, we will put the links to all those 3 items under the recording. So the last question, the people want to learn more about Rowan, where do they search?
Where do they search? Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, I guess, Rowan Bunning. And yeah, I've got a company called Adapt with Style. So it's evolved. It's basically been like a brand family over the years from a startup company I had creating real software products called Software with Style. Then people asked me, because I was doing lots of Scrum training, is this only for software? Well, no, I call it Scrum with Style. And more recently, it's all about adaptability, a lot of what we're doing.
So
right?
we're waiting for the less with style as well in this case. All right, thank you very much for the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening to us. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to watch Rowan recording from the LESS conference Singapore, and don't forget to join the LESS Singapore conference next year. Thank you.
To learn more, visit procognita.com/getagile.